Travis, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, happy to be here. I appreciate the invite and a chance to chat.
So obviously we're here today to talk about Pendulum, which is one of the biggest releases of this year. It seems to have created a massive storm, as is always the case with Stonemaier. But before we get into the game itself, I want to talk a little bit about you and your history, because this is your first big published game, is that right?
Yeah, first published game, period. There was Jones is a very common last name, so there was this brief bit of misinformation. I remember when we put the game up on WBG, Jamey accidentally tagged. I think he actually submitted the designer, so I actually accidentally tagged the wrong Travis Jones, which someone who had designed one other game. But this is the first game that I published.
Okay.
I've designed others, but this is the first one I published.
And it came to be by going to one of Jamey Stonemaier open forums, right? A few years back, you brought your game in a different guise, and Jamey, I heard, didn't play it that day, but it got rated the highest they've ever had on one of their days. Is that the case?
Yeah. I took it to design day, and I reached out to Jamey. I have a friend who works with them some, and so I sort of tried to like leverage network as best as I could to reach out to say, hey, do you think you'd be interested? And I went through like the web submission form. And Jamey was kind enough to reply. Honestly, you don't need a friend. You can just reach out to him, and he replies to everyone on social media. But this friend reached out and said, "Oh, I got this friend with this, real-time worker placement game." And Jamey was like, "That sounds nice. Like, he can submit it to the forum, but a real-time worker placement game doesn't sound like the kind of thing that I'd want to do." Which is interesting, is you get that response from a lot of people when they hear about the game, like real-time strategy game. Nah, no thanks. So Jamey had the same first impression. So I went to design day with very little expectation. But to your point, it rated so well, it got such a good response, is really what made him pause and take a second look and say, okay, maybe I should look at this thing. And fortunately, as many people do that playtest the game, he had the same response of like, first impression, this doesn't sound like it's going to work. And then he tried it out and said, oh, this is actually really cool and really different. And so he was pretty quickly all in and signed the game right after that.
So what was the game called at that point?
It was called Heir to the Empire.
Heir to the Empire, right. Because I was going through the previous design days, and I was looking obviously for Pendulum, and it wasn't there. But I saw that game on the year that it was, and it was the highest rank. I was like, well, that must be it, because it was the highest rank. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So back then, I understood it had a theme very much sort of quite not dissimilar to this. And then that theme was taken away, and then this theme was then put back in. Is that because I heard the story that you maybe thought they wouldn't want a theme so fantasy-led?
Yeah, exactly. So it was always called, I started calling it Heir to the Empire pretty early on as I thought of the game, because very early on, the theme, the general idea for the theme came right along as I thought up the idea with the sort of the mechanics and the timers. I mean, it dreamed up the mechanic first, but then I quickly started thinking, well, what would be the theme as I try to make a prototype for this thing? And very quickly I settled on the whole idea of the game is to try to do real time in sort of a new and different way. Where don't get me wrong, there's still some time pressure to the game, but it's not as much like this ticking clock, and you're interacting and manipulating the time differently than it feels like in other real-time games. Hopefully that's for the customer to judge. So that was always the intent. So I wanted the theme to feel to evoke something different and not be a typical real-time theme where it's like you're in a factory and pies are running down the track like I Love Lucy or something, which fits a lot of real-time games because it's supposed to give you this frantic feel. But the whole idea for Pendulum was to come at real-time differently. So I wanted to make sure the theme was different. So it was always this empire, and I first dreamed up this fantasy empire, like you mentioned. And then as I got ready to pitch it, I was like, oh, board game publishers don't want fantasy realms. They want something historical stuff. So I switched it over to a Roman theme because I thought that was just more palatable.
Right.
Although there was things that I liked about the Roman theme, but when I signed with Jamey, he was like, have you thought about a fantasy world? So I was like, that's actually how I always thought of it. And so I was happy to switch back. Like I said, the Roman works in ways. It's still it was still an empire. You were trying to succeed Caesar, actually, like rewriting history to become the emperor of Rome. But the fantasy setting just opens up so much more cool ways to play around with the characters in the game, which I think is where you get a lot of sort of the story of the game. As you take on your character, and you can feel like your game is different because I'm this character versus the person next to me. And the fantasy world allows for a lot more just kind of creative ideas there. You can, the fantasy magic can break the rules of reality, so you can be a lot more creative with the story and how the mechanics can change for your character.
For sure. So how different was that game to what we've got now in the final published version?
So yeah, besides the theme change that we just talked about, there was some good solid changes to the core of the game that sort of happened through development. But more just kind of a couple. I mean, the heart of the game was really there.
Mm.
There wasn't a big change to, the 3 different zones, the timers in each area, and even the time of each timer was didn't change. Like that was a long process to get all that right. Which is why it got a good response at Design Day. So there was a couple things. There was one good one with the core mechanic of the game that I think Jamie's talked about on one of his broadcasts, or maybe it was in a design diary, sort of with the I won't go through all the details, but the timing of when you take an action with the worker, you used to have to wait until the timer was done. You would take the action as you picked up the worker. And Jamie had the great insight of why don't they just do that while the timer's there? It sort of evens out the cognitive load of the game a lot better, so that you do the action while the timer's there because you're just waiting anyways. So it gave the game an even better flow. So there were a couple of those good changes, but a lot of it was more sort of rounding off the edges of, oh, does this action spot make sense here? It's quicker and easier if we just move it down here and reduce the cost, or move this up and increase the cost. And little, lots of important refinements, but nothing that sort of changed the heart of the game, I guess.
Sure. Okay. In the playtesting, did people find the whole you can only place workers where there are no timers and only do work where there are timers thing difficult? Because that thing is mentioned, I think, 157 times in the rules.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
there's
that's
really
very
a
true.
feel from someone in the back of this game that bit's tricky. Whereas I've put this into a number of people now, and every single person gets that first time. I just say, you can place a worker where there's no timers and do an action where there is one. They're like, okay, cool. What's next?
Yeah.
What was it a problem in playtesting or something?
So what the emphasis on it really came from, it wasn't a super common problem. To your point, it's really pretty intuitive for most people. The reason we got so repetitive with it is, it's the key is most any rule in the game, if you don't remember it or you mess it up, it's pretty quick to fix.
Yes.
Like if someone says, you take a province and you forget to align the color and you tuck it in the wrong spot, then someone may notice in real time, or maybe just don't notice till the council phase, and someone can say, oh, you put that card in the wrong spot, and they go, oh, okay, I'll just move it over here so it's in the right spot. And it's not really going to change the game a whole lot. People always make little small mistakes here and there.
Yeah.
It's if that rule gets broken, then the whole game goes off the rails. So that's why we're so emphatic about it, because we've seen the play experience where if someone does forget that rule, they can just get completely lost in the real time, because they're like, oh, I just put my worker there, but if you put it on the wrong row, then the timer flips, and suddenly you thought you were about to take the action, and now you look back and you're not taking the action because your timer is now on the row without the timer, and people get so confused, and that's where you sort of get this brain freeze of just like they don't understand what's going on. And just all the game grinds to a halt, which is something you got to be really careful about in a real time. There was a lot of just development process to figuring out what are the things where if you get it wrong, the whole game falls apart, and what are the things where if you get it wrong, just like in any other game, oh, whoops, I paid 3 gold instead of 2. Does that really change, my experience and enjoyment of the game? It's not a big deal.
Right.
So that was the key to emphasizing that so much.
That makes sense. You're right. I have seen a few reviewers actually who, in my opinion, got that rule wrong, and also a lot of people were posting on social media who are saying, "Oh, I maxed out all the scores on game one. They've definitely got that rule wrong." And it's funny, but anyway, I don't want to get into that. So going back to the design day, you took it there. Everyone played it. Everyone loved it. You scored the highest of any design day in the Stonemaier Games design day of all time. But Jamie didn't play it that day, right?
No, he didn't. Yeah.
Okay. Did you talk to him that day?
Yeah, I chatted with him some. He goes around to all the tables.
Yeah.
And he's easy to approach and chat with. So I talked to him a little bit in between the breaks, and he stopped by the table because I'd reached out and told him I was submitting the game. He stopped by and he watched part of the teach, I think, and he may have sort of walked by to see some of the gameplay, but didn't really hang around for the whole teach or observe a long part of the game.
So. Yeah. On that day, were you sat there thinking, I'm walking away here with a published Stonemaier Games here, or are you thinking there's absolutely no chance? Like, where were you on that scale?
Oh, interesting. What was the day of? I mean, I felt a lot better. Jamie's really good about the scores that you get in the game. You don't get them the day of, but he compiles them and sends them out the very next day, which is great. You don't have to wait long, because it's like like being back in school, waiting for like your grades to post or something. Like you're so interested to see the results. So he's very quick about it. So I felt a lot better once he posted that, and I was like, oh my gosh, my game's #1 with this huge score. And as you mentioned, I think at the time I'd maybe looked up past year, so I was like, well, that's even higher than any other past years that have scored. So that was what really made me think maybe James is going to take a look. But the day of, I wasn't as certain, but I got great feedback. Well, I didn't have the score. Like the people who played the game were chatting with me afterwards, like, this is great. You got to find a publisher for this. Like, this is so different and innovative. This is unlike anything I've ever seen. I got all that feedback, which I gotten in places before, playtesting the game and other conventions. The reason I was pitching it because I felt like it was getting to a good spot. But I got really good positive feedback there. And I think there was actually someone else who played the game who knew another publisher, and they put me in touch with. So, he was like, I got to tell him about this game. And so he gave me the email, we traded info, and that person was emailing me the next day. So I did feel pretty good that it would get published the day of, but I don't think that I was very certain it would be published with Stonemaier. It wasn't until the scores came out and then Jamey reached out that I thought we had a chance there. So
he then emailed and said, okay, looks like we got something here. Let's meet up. And you just had a chat and it went from there.
Yeah, there's still a process to it. Like when he first reached out, for any aspiring designers or somebody that might watch this video, there's still a process. It's not like, I heard you got a good game, so we'll sign it. Here's the contract. It was a back and forth, which honestly is what I would want in retrospect.
Sure.
You want them to chat and make sure they understand where you're coming from, and they want to understand where the designer is coming from. So Jamey had questions. We traded back and forth of like, what is your goal with the game? If we change this, or this, tell me why we should or shouldn't. And I think that's both to test out ideas he maybe wanted to change, but also just to see sort of how I would respond. And as the designer, am I being thoughtful about what the impacts are? Am I just saying, no, it's my game, don't touch it? Or am I actually thinking through and say, well, we could explore that, but this would have these downstream impacts. Yeah. So it's kind of, getting to know each other and trading ideas around the game. You kind of got to, test out that rapport to make sure it feels like things are going to work. So fortunately it did. And within a couple of weeks, he signed the game.
Wow, that must have been such a fascinating. I'd love to be a fly on the wall to have seen those meetings go on. Where are you based in the States? It's St. Louis, right? Where are you?
I'm in Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay, I have no idea about American geography. Forgive me.
Sure. It's like in the South. It's he's in St. Louis, which is kind of right in the middle of America, in Missouri. So I'm in the Southeast, in the South.
Are you just jumping on a plane
South, as we call it in America.
What's that? Forwards? Are you just flying backwards and forwards on the plane for these meetings or something? How's it going?
No, we do it online. In this day and age, and actually we do a lot over email. I think I don't know if I ever talked with Jamey about it, but I get the impression I think he likes the email exchange because you can be very thoughtful. For those kind of questions, which I appreciate. I could sit there and take my time, not have to respond, come up with something on the spot. He would send me an email and I would marinate on it for a couple of days, like thinking through how would I respond to this, and what do I think about what he's suggesting, and thinking through how it would impact the game. So it was more like these sort of long emails back and forth was more of the exchange. But.
Okay. And was there ever a moment where you met up and there was like some big ceremonial signing thing or a cutting of ribbon or something like? Do you know what I mean?
It's for signing the game. No, there wasn't. He sent me the contract online. I just signed it. We had exchange back and forth. Excited to work with you and like let's get going, but we didn't meet up. I think and then I came back to a couple of the design days after that, which was a good chance to meet him in person and just chat about how things were going with the game and connect there. And then I think I was looking forward to this year with the release. And meeting up with him at Gen Con or Design Day or somewhere else. But then of course the pandemic came along, which just many other negative effects that are much more important for the world. But as one minor one, it was a bummer that when my game came out, there was no public, couldn't go to a convention, couldn't see it played at conventions or go to Gen Con with the release or do any of that public stuff, which is a bummer. But.
That sucks. It would have been such a cool thing. But so a year later, you went to a different design day and now you're signed. There's been a bunch of conversations back and forth. The game's developing and you walked into this room knowing that you've gone through this process that all these other people in that room are going through right now, but your game is signed up and it's coming out at some point. That must have been a pretty cool feeling.
Yeah. No, it was definitely less stressful. It was like, I know in the UK, I know you don't have high school, but I don't know, it reminds me of something like that. The first day, like, being a junior or senior in high school and then seeing the freshmen coming in their first day, it's like that look of like stress and terror and nervousness in the eyes Like absolutely, it was a different experience coming back with the, feeling like something was signed and being like, oh, I don't have to be as stressed.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when I was going back to those design days, I was bringing other designs that I was working on. So I actually did still have a little bit of that of like, oh, how's this new game going to go over? So I still got some of that, but there was a little bit of comfort knowing that I'd had my first game signed. So.
Yeah. So you got a game design signed up, but you're still trying to get more a year later.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
I don't know. Maybe it's just being a creative type. It's like you're always just angsting over the next thing that you have in mind. So I've tried to like pause and enjoy it. And there's been moments like you talked about going back to design day and be like, oh, I've got a signed game this time. This feels different. So there's been moments where I've been able to enjoy it, but there's also like, I don't know, I'm just not walking around on cloud nine all the time thinking that I'm set. I don't know. I'm always looking for the next thing, the next challenge.
So I like that. I think if it was me, I'd be walking into that design day with like Saturday Night Fever going on in my head, like just
yeah. Like, walking with sunglasses.
Yeah. Guys, I got this. So now the game's out. Obviously, it's had some massive online following from everyone who's got any connection to board games, and I guess that's because it's associated with Stonemaier, and Jamey is very much a public figure. And this whole thing I find fascinating in that, I mean, Stonemaier have the perception of this big, massive, huge corporate publisher, but they're not. They're just quite simply, factually not. It's two full-time workers who've had 10 games out in 8 years. Like, that is not a big beast of a corporation. But I think they put themselves out there in that way because Jamey's just good at social media, and he's very present with his Facebook and his YouTube and his Insta. And that's it. It seems to be as simple as that, potentially coupled with the fact that they've had some games that are very popular, and Wingspan obviously exploded and won a ton of awards and seemed to annoy people that it won best card game on the BGG thing. And I get that annoyed me too because it's not a card game. It's a great game. So do we really care about what mechanic it's winning? I don't know. But that seems to be it. I can't really put my finger on it other than maybe just the whole anything that gets too big, like a movie or a band or anything that gets too big, people in this world seem to like to knock that stuff down as soon as there's a second to, which frustrates me because at its core, and I've played Pendulum a lot with a lot of different people, Pendulum is a brilliant game. I absolutely love it. I find it fascinating in its nuance, but people seem to want to find things wrong with it, and that frustrates me. But having cut through most of all the nonsense, I think the reaction to the game, if you look at the scores on BGG and talking to people online who I know have played it, seems to be, I would say, 95% positive. And I would argue 99% positive for people that have given it a proper crack. So this is my next question. There's a lot of preamble here, but it's an important one for me. This game, I think, is brilliant in that it kind of talks you through the game. Like, the first game, it encourages you, maybe don't use the timers for the first couple of rounds or maybe the entire game. Definitely don't use the advanced player mats and cards for the first game. Now, it's kind of talking you through it. And the way I've likened it to a few of my friends is the first time you drive a car, when you're rubbish at it and you've got nowhere to and you're stalling it in your dad's drive, you don't really enjoy that process, but you know you want to do it again because you want to get better at it. And the first time I played Pendulum, I was a little bit like, whoa, what's going on? I'm not quite sure about this. But I knew I instantly wanted to play it again. And I did the very next night, and the very next night after that, and the very next night after that, which is very rare for me because there's so many games coming in and out. It's rare I'll play the same one over and over. But I have with this. But the game talks you through it in a very clever way that kind of says, okay, here's a new bit of the game. Here's a new bit of the game. And when I teach it, I'm sure you're the same. I'm sure most people are the same. No one even talks about the council phase till you get to it. They just say, that's important. So don't forget that. But I'm not going to tell you what happens in the council phase till we get there. Like, the whole game is taught in stages. But as such, I feel that some people have played this game maybe once, instantly put their thoughts out onto the Twitterverse or whatever it may be, and they haven't done so with the right care and the right studied opinion. Like, what are your thoughts on that? How do you feel when you see people say things like, "Oh, I've maxed out all my points on game one"? Absolutely, you've got to. It drives me nuts, and I've got nothing to do with the game.
No, I mean, it's been interesting to see the reaction, and I've never really put something out creatively, professionally, I guess. But I've done many creative endeavors in the past. I was in a band back in college, lead guitarist. I've always had this sort of creative energy that I need to find an outlet for. And I've always been interested in like hearing the story of other artists or creators in different spots. So I was prepared for the fact that you're going to get negative reaction. To your point, there's, when I think of the reaction of the game, I do hope a lot of people enjoy it. I mean, we play tested a lot, and I know that a lot of people can really enjoy the game because I've seen them have that response. And so I for that part of the reaction, the positive reaction, I love seeing it out there. I mean, that is just great to see people going through the journey, like you mentioned, because I do think it really is something different and new. And so I think that's part of that plays in a part of what you're seeing is that I think some people, really get into the newness and sort of want to play it a bunch, and it can be addictive almost. But then there's some people that, to your point, maybe this, it's something that is touted is really popular or hyped. You're always going to have people that say, well, why is it so special? And they're just sort of set to have a negative reaction. So that's part of it. So I try to keep that in mind, to your point, that there's some people that are just going to come out and bash anything that's popular. But then there's some people that legitimately won't enjoy the game, and that's fine. When I see some of that negative reaction, mostly what I'm trying to piece together is okay, is this person someone who I think should enjoy the game? Like, are they part of the target market? Or are they someone who's just not? Because not every board game is for everyone. So, to the extent that some people don't enjoy the game, that's fine with me, as long as we've got a good audience that does enjoy it.
What about
but to your point about trying to give it go.
No, you go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, to your point about giving a shot, that is tricky, and that goes into the difficulties of making a real-time game. Which is, maybe I'm a glutton for punishment, but this was what fascinated me so much, was once I came up with this idea for this really different take that I thought could make the real-time mechanic approachable to people who don't always like real-time. Because I'm not like some diehard real-time game fan. I hadn't played many real-time games even before I came up with this idea. It was so appealing to me to try to come up with a way that's not traditional super stress real-time hecticness. But that you're not waiting on other people to take their turns. You're always just engaged with the game. That was the idea that got me into it and excited about it. And it is very different. Yeah. And we have something new and different. People don't know how to respond to it, and people will just sometimes respond to it differently. And to your point about sort of giving it a chance, when it is something that's very new and different, people can quickly form certain opinions. Because there's not a consensus opinion necessarily to follow. So people will just sort of say, oh, well, this was negative, and this must be really bad because I've never seen anyone do this before. So there must be a reason that no one has ever done this before, because this is a stupid idea. And in some ways, it is a pretty crazy idea. And there are a lot of landmines and pitfalls to someone's experience with a real-time game. And you can see in how we developed it, we really tried to address that. And we were thoughtful about it. With the untimed variant so that you can learn, and the advanced variant, because if you do play the game a lot, you will find people that are able to max out their tracks. And the reason we have the advanced variant is once you get that level of skill, which usually takes a while. I don't know that I've seen many people do it on their first play, but you can get there. And so the advanced variant is very simple. It's not sort of over-engineered. Well, now the advanced, you have to do this and do that and change the board. It's just this one simple rule about not putting two workers in the same spot. And once you change that one rule, it massively increases the difficulty. And for an experienced player, actually, I enjoy it increases the complexity of the game. So we're very thoughtful about making sure there was those ramps. And I understand some people may have a bit of a negative experience, and they're not going to take time to do those ramps. They're just going to say, well, I didn't like it, so I'm not going to go back and play this other variant that you think I should play, or do this other version. And that's just going to be the case. There's a lot of board games out there, a lot of cool things for people to play. So if you don't like your first impression, I understand people may not go through that journey of saying, well, here's the different levers you can pull to make the game more enjoyable. But, like I said, that's okay. Some people, not every game is for everyone. So.
See, it's a very good response, and it's probably why I will never, ever be on your side of this conversation. If I was you, it would drive me nuts, because I think the first time I played this game, I was like, that's like a 7 out of 10 experience. And then the second time, I reckon I would have said 8. Third time, I would have said 9 out of 10. And now I still haven't posted my review on BGG yet, because I'm still debating, how high I'm going to go. So
yeah.
I'm trying to get through my own positive hype, because hype can go both ways. It can push you down, like we've talked about, but for me, sort of anything Stonemaier pushes it up for me. So I'm trying to calm myself down and go, okay, what is my considered opinion of this game? But right now, it's very high. But like I said, the first time I played it, it was probably a 7, and it's because obviously I played the the basic version of the player boards, which are, they're cool, but everyone's the same. And then you flip them over, which we did by game 2, and then you've got this asymmetry that completely changes it. And I went with the one that I didn't understand the most, and I was posting on the Pendulum Facebook group going, anyone use this character yet? Anyone got a clue what this is all about? Because it seems really, really hard.
Oh, I think I saw the post about it. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then so I was like, well, the only way I can really do this is try it, and I tried it, and it was a really big challenge, and it was really fun, and the game was completely different and layered and all this complexity, and so for me, if I was you and I saw somebody play Pendulum, and they played it for the first time and understandably played with all the basic rules and all the basic player mats and player cards and everything, and then came away going, it's okay. If I was you, I'd be like, okay, now try again with the other stuff. And so I've been debating in my mind, is it therefore right that you and other publishers and designers of games make versions of the game within the game like this that are easy? Or do you just say to people, look, this is a slightly tricky game. You're going to have to spend maybe 15, 20 minutes reading the rules and chatting to your friends to confirm it all, because this is it. And there is no A and B side. It's just the B side. And there are no simple variants. It's just straight into it. Because then at least everybody who plays the game, everybody gets the full game. Because I reckon a ton of people are going to play this and maybe not play second or third time, because maybe they're playing at a friend's house. It's not their copy. Playing in a cafe, it's not their copy. And everyone's first game is probably going to be the basic version. So that's my question. Is it the right thing to have that simple version in there? Do you want all your people stalling their car on their dad's drive on their first game?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And it was something that me and Jamey both put a lot of thought and agonized over what was the right way to offer these levels in the game, or should there be levels at all? Because and it's interesting that we ended up with some of these with the basic characters and the advanced characters, because I think me and Jamey both, maybe I shouldn't speak for Jamey, but I'm pretty sure I think he feels this way, is the way he's talked about games, but I certainly feel this way, which is that I actually really don't like just what you talked about. I don't like a basic version. Like I remember playing a Greek Law back in the day when I was first getting into the games, and I was like, what's the stupid family variant? Why would I ever play that? Just show me your game and let me play it. Yeah. So I am predisposed to not like that. So it was absolutely by no means an assumption that like, oh, let's cook up a game with the simple version, then we'll walk them up to the advanced. I was very thoughtful about whether or not that should be introduced into the game. So we did put a lot of thought into it. So I guess there's two main things I would say about that. First of all, there is a lot of interesting asymmetry in the advanced characters. You don't get as much asymmetry in the basic character. But what I find with a lot of playtesting, and there's still going to be different responses. As you said, the game has grown in enjoyment, which is totally fine and understandable. But I've seen in a lot of our experience, the basic characters are still in a lot of ways we tried to distill down to what was the most fun character to play. And so like you'll see the basic characters all have, I guess I say this, you've actually played the game before, which I haven't done this interview with someone who's played before. The basic characters all have that same stratagem card that lets you free a worker. Yeah. Which was always consistently through the feedback the most fun card. Yeah. So you'll see like it, and honestly, it makes the game more hectic and a little more complex. And we were really torn about putting that in the basic characters, because that's just that, to the extent that you are stressed out by the real time, the more decisions you have to make, the more stressed you'll be. And that's a card that just always is going to free a worker, and that's another decision you have to make. So we're really torn about, should that be in the basic game, because it's adding to the the mental load. But it was always, even for people who had never played the game before, the most fun card. They loved being able to free a worker. It was just so exciting to get them free, because it was so agonizing to see them locked up for 2 or 3 minutes. They were just like, okay, this counteracts the fact that it makes the game a little more complex. So we need to put in the basic characters. The first time everyone plays, they get to play what through the feedback was some of the most fun cards. So we really try to make sure that the basic game, while it doesn't have as much asymmetry, like the game you're playing is not watered down. It is a very fun version of all the characters that you can play. And you still get some different asymmetry through the victory point tracks. And hopefully for someone's first time, that is still a decent amount of asymmetry, just to encourage them to focus on different parts of the game. So we're very, very thoughtful about making sure that basic versus advanced were still equally fun. I think you just appreciate the advanced more once you know the basic, and now you can see how the asymmetry breaks those rules. But you kind of need that foundation first to appreciate the asymmetry, I think. but the second point I would say is so beyond that, maybe I buried the lead, which is the second point is the whole reason of why we put in the basic characters, because like I said, I'm inclined not to include that. But ultimately, it's just one of the challenges of making a real-time game. You know, when you're trying to do this thing that we've done, where you have like a real strategy game played in real time, there are just so many landmines and so many, like I said, points where it can go completely off the rails. And when a real-time game goes off the rails, it's not just, oh, I messed up this one thing. It's like the whole experience is completely shot for the person who goes through that. So that's one thing that I'll say. It's been interesting seeing some of the feedback from reviewers and people posting on forums of like, why did they do this? Why didn't do that? And it's like, oh, you don't know, if you change that, how bad things can go. It's really like this delicate sort of fragile thing to get the real time to work right, for everyone. So the basic characters help alleviate that. So what we found when we started playing around with the advanced characters, if you've never played the game before, someone sits there and teaches you the rules about here's how it works, here's the core mechanic, like we just talked about earlier. When the timer's in the row, you can take an action. When they're not, you can't. Or when the timer's not there, then you can move your worker off, and you get that down. That's the core of the game. Don't mess it up, otherwise everything goes off the rails. Now let's start playing. The person to my right immediately goes and takes a worker off a row with the timer, and I'm like, wait, what the hell's going on? You know, it causes a lot more difficulty with people learning the game. So that was why we realized, like, if we're gonna have all this fun with the advanced characters who break the rules, it causes too much chaos to have that happen in someone's first game. And not only for to see someone else do it, but then when you're being told to break the rules, it just becomes much more tricky. And it's really just because the nature of a real-time game, you really got to make sure everything is crisp and clear, more so than another game. So that's where we realized, like, we really need to make sure someone's first play is consistent across the characters, but is a really fun version of the game. And if they take it and they like it, then you can say, okay, now what you just learned, wouldn't it be fun if you broke the rules and you got to do this and this and this. And to your point, hopefully, per your experiences, what others have, that is this ramp up of like, oh, this was really cool, and now it can get cooler when I go play around with this and this and this.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the thing that is the case. But it's just frustrating to me that I think some people will only ever play the game once and won't get that full experience. So I just, you know, every time I see anyone playing this game socially, I'm like, and they posted a picture, and they've obviously posted a picture of the basic board. I'm like, right, now play again with the advanced board, and let me know what you think once you've done that.